India in details.
European science. And they are proud of it. Why are they hiding this from you? Germany, France, Sweden, Italy, Britain, and more.
काम ऐसा करके जाओ कि दुनिया याद रखेगी.
A hand stroke could be something like this.
बस असली होना चाहिए. बस असली होना चाहिए.
बस असली होना चाहिए.
You are not allowed to touch anything. Use a stick, you!
बस कटोरा लो और भागो. Drink in it when it's warm. European women would do something like this to reach that.
German women mixing a secret ingredient into the coffee.
Indians need to know this about this European science and about Indian scientific texts. Ask Europeans and Indians what they are proud of. Many Indians are likely to talk about Hindu scientific ideas and their glorious civilizational and scientific heritage. On the other hand, it is likely that some Europeans will talk about their Renaissance period and the Age of Enlightenment. Some Europeans may also talk about their top scientists and other prominent personalities who continue to inspire them even today. But what happens when you start to compare India's scientific heritage with Europe's scientific heritage? Well, there is a lot that they don't want to tell you, and there is a lot that they are cunningly hiding from you. To understand that better, let's travel back in time a bit. I take you to European pharmacies in the 20th century. What are they selling? What is in the 1908 catalog of a reputable German pharmaceutical company? Hold your breath and read this carefully. Genuine Egyptian mummy, as long as the supply lasts, 17 marks 50 per kilogram. Yes, Europeans ate Egyptian mummies as medicine, the dark reality of so-called great scientific and industrial progress in Europe. But don't go anywhere, I have a lot more for you. Now let's time travel to the West Highlands of the 19th century, where a cure for blindness was to dry and powder human poop and blow it in the eyes. Are you surprised? Well, now let's meet this man, Robert Boyle. Here, this article from the BBC describes him as one of the founders of modern chemistry. They even describe him as a leading figure of 17th century intellectual culture and one of the most prolific figures in the scientific revolution. For cataracts, the so-called father of modern chemistry proposed dry powder of human to blow into the eye. And dear Indians, don't forget that Robert Boyle was addressed as one of the directors of the East India Company. Don't forget that this was the man who did a lot to convert the so-called uncivilized pagans to Christianity. Many Christians around the Western world are so proud of him today. There is a sculpture in Ireland honoring his legacy. Now let's time travel to Renaissance London. What kind of perfumes are they using here? Animal perfumes with an odor of poop and also human excrement as a key ingredient? Now, for a few seconds, let's time travel to India, where the Vijayanagar kingdom's sophisticated Ministry for Fragrance is overseeing their perfume manufacturing in a beautiful setting that seems very advanced, very prosperous, and highly civilized. And that man is Sri Krishna Devarya, known for his immense contribution to science and technology. He is considered as one of the greatest emperors that the world has witnessed. Okay, we will return to India later, but for now, let's time travel to Germany in the 19th century. By the way, why are these Germans running with a bowl in their hands? With a katora in their hand, these Germans are running desperately to get several drops of fresh, warm if they can. They believe that it is a cure for their disease or ailments. But where would that warm come from? Well, it would come from the body of a criminal who has just been beheaded in a public execution. Yes, I am talking about the practice of drinking at beheadings in 19th century Germany, something they don't teach in our sanitized European history books. Read it carefully if you are curious about this. Yes, read it to understand what the so-called civilized German Christians were doing. As described here, drinking directly from the body of a criminal in a wild frenzy of joy. Now let's time travel to Sweden. Yes, we are still in the 19th century. As the execution takes place and the blood starts dripping from the criminal's body, the thirsty crowd of onlookers goes absolutely crazy. Police and guards find it difficult to control them. Desperate men and women, the so-called civilized Europeans of the 19th century, rush forward and collect the soaked sand or soil and put it into their mouths. A Swedish treatment for epilepsy, cramp and other diseases. Yes, this is an actual event that took place in Sweden. You can read that here. Newspaper name, the Blackburn Standard. Date, July 11, 1866. I wonder if Greta Thunberg and PewDiePie were taught about this side of Sweden in their school or college. Now let's time travel to Britain, still in the 19th century. Here is a popular method used to cure wens or goiter. Patients wait until a criminal receives a life sentence. Once the criminal is hanged, the criminal's hand is used to stroke or rub the body parts of patients. Read this over here. It was reported by the Morning Post. A hand stroked could be something like this. Yes, curing diseases by the man's hand in the so-called civilized Europe of the 19th century. Now it's time to introduce you to the so-called father of neuroscience. His name is Thomas Willis. This article in Nature describes him as one of the greatest neuroanatomists of all time. He was a proud Christian and was considered to be the richest doctor in England. But what a shame that the so-called father of neuroscience and the so-called pioneer of brain science prepared a drink for apoplexy or that mixed powdered human and chocolate. Dear England, what a shame that this man is your hero. It seems that he deserves to be your national embarrassment. Go and re-educate yourselves. My fellow Europeans, the bitter truth is that many of your heroes are turning out to be criminals who were criminals or promoted capitalism. Dear viewers, I now introduce you to the so-called father of toxicology and the so-called philosopher of the German Renaissance. His name is Paracelsus. See the kind of so-called medicine he promoted. Human fat. And over here is his so-called remedy for epilepsy. His recommendations from a decapitated man, pieces of the human and of course, mummy as described here. So who is he? A hero or a monster? But see how they praise him. And what a pity that this man is recognized as the most influential medical scientist in Western Europe during the Renaissance. Germany, how dare you issue a stamp for a man who promoted what many describe as Germany. Shame on you. This is the dirty reality of Europeans' so-called Renaissance. Mind you, what I am talking about was culturally accepted and an integral part of the mainstream Western society. As described by the author, Richard Sack, in our so-called civilized and enlightened Europe, the question was not, should you eat, but rather, what sort of should you eat? Yes, I want to expose the dirty reality of their so-called Renaissance period and the so-called Age of Enlightenment. The so-called European intellectual movement, something that many in Europe are so proud of. So to start with, on the one hand, Hindu scientific ideas, Hindu super advanced surgical techniques, and Hindu sophisticated medicinal system and Hindu engineering were all flourishing in the land of Bharat for centuries. While on the other hand, top European priests, kings or scientists were prescribing or consuming human blood, flesh, bone, fat, bones, and skin in an attempt to heal themselves from various diseases. The shocking truth is that medicinal utilized the formidable weight of European science. Yes, I am talking about their so-called scientific revolutions. Yes, you heard that right. Those who deceitfully accused others of being savage were savage themselves. As mentioned here, the real criminals were in fact the Europeans. Not only that, even mummies were stolen from Egyptian tombs and skulls were taken from Irish burial sites. Body parts were robbed and traded. People from Europe didn't just commit genocides and destroy our global civilizational heritage. They quite literally ate it. Shamelessly, Europeans even used grinded up Egyptian mummies to make a pigment of paint. Paintings were made using that brown color. Many Europeans saw nothing wrong with cannibalism until the 1900s. And the so-called European royal families? Well, royal such as Charles II, Francis I of France, Christian IV of Denmark and William III were just the tip of the social iceberg. As described here, the rich and the poor, the educated and the illiterate, all participated in cannibalism on a more or less routine basis. Europeans even made drugs from the dried bodies of travelers who drowned in North African desert sandstorms. They didn't even spare the corpses of hanged criminals. As explained here, human was also swallowed, sometimes fresh and hot, seconds after a beheading, sometimes direct from a living donor's body, sometimes dried, powdered or distilled. Europeans even used human. Yes, cannibalism was a common part of everyday medicine from Spain to England. Yes, viewers, read this. In London chemist shops, one could see entire human cells for sale. Europeans even ate the botanical moss grown on the wall. There was nothing that could not be used in some way, as explained by Richard Sack. Hair, brain, heart, skin, liver, urine, menstrual blood, placenta, earwax, saliva, and feces. The so-called civilized European colonial Christian criminal states. Yes, for hundreds of years, European Christians ate or drank human flesh, bone, brains, and blood. Even Indian skeletons were stolen from Calcutta and taken to the West. Will we ever know what was actually done to all of them? Western countries, if you have any shame, return those skeletons to India. The Europeans who claimed that they were civilized established trade networks and laboratories. Those who stole dead bodies were sponsored, and they even had import duties on human bodies and human skulls. Egyptian mummies were in such demand in Europe that counterfeiting started. Like people in India are keen to buy asli desi ghee. Europeans were keen to buy mummies that were asli. Yes, bas asli hona chahiye. The very thought that today the descendants, grandchildren or great-grandchildren of Europeans who did all this might be teaching the victim nations about human rights should give you goosebumps. But what a pity that the descendants of savage psychopaths seem so proud of their twisted European legacy. After knowing all this, Europeans' scientific revolutions, Renaissance, and the Age of Enlightenment all seem twisted, very twisted. Read this, the so-called French Revolution and the arts of human labor. And this. And this. What is described here as European tradition, seriously, they even used it as a leather. Never forget that England was known as a key exporter of humans in the international market. And never forget that Germany was an especially keen importer of human skulls. As explained here, right through the 18th century, the British levied import and export duties on the skulls of Irish men, women, and children. Even the victims of the Irish massacre. I am running out of words to describe this. Now, time travel to the 17th century in Europe for the so-called Western beauty secret. Read all this. Pigeon's dung, ashes of burnt frogs, goat's dung, one's own urine to wash the face to make it fair, washing hands in the warm to get white hands. I must point out that in those days, many Europeans were very keen to get whiter and fair skin. Now let's focus on the situation in 18th century France. As described here, every day, a lady of high standing washed her hands and face with a special fluid to keep her complexion the most beautiful in the world. So, what was that fluid? Well, as explained here, it was basically the moisture carefully collected from a healthy young man's poop in a time-consuming process. मतलब मानव माल की भाप तक इकट्ठा किया और चेहरे पर लगाया. शर्म आनी चाहिए. Just read that process here. I mean, on the one hand, we have India's sophisticated Ayurveda-based formulations that the Westerners are still so keen to buy and benefit from. And then we have this. As far as the European love stories are concerned, how many of you know about this? As explained here, both German and Serbian women were known to mix their menstrual blood into the coffee or wine of husbands or those they sought to win. So basically, human poop powder in the eyes, human moisture on the face, poop-based perfumes, walking on filled European streets, and then even mixing menstrual blood into their future husband's coffee? So that's the dirty reality of the Romeos and Juliets of Europe that they cunningly, dishonestly, and deceitfully hide from you. Now read this. Scandinavian drinkers. Even desperate to get those extra drops. The so-called wise women of Norway and Sweden in the 19th century. In Brighton, around 20 women rubbed their wens upon a criminal's body. Here is 19th century Germany. A thirsty, desperate mob breaking through the chain of soldiers with their katora or towels to catch it warm. In Dresden, Germany, a man took the cure and then ran away. Running after drinking that warm thing was considered a part of the so-called cure. Here are more secrets about Germany. Read them here. Of course, Europeans didn't just keep the filthy and dirty side of their culture within Europe. They took that culture or those beliefs abroad with them, as they decided to steal others' land. Read this here, the Germanic settlers of Pennsylvania. As described here, these Europeans with their katoras and katoris in their hands were so desperate to drink warm from a body that there would be stampede-like situations. Those who were not able to drink it directly would even eat mud from the ground where the blood had dropped. In Germany, soaked sand was routinely sold. Even the stool that was used was broken and distributed among the desperate German crowd. Apart from the furniture, even the rope that was used in executions was in demand. They sold it, inch by inch. Price, 1 shilling for an inch. The so-called civilized Europeans. In a way, it reminds me of the USA, where white crowds would go with their families to watch lynchings of African Americans. They were treated as picnics. Even souvenirs were produced and sold from the remains of victim bodies in the USA. So yes, Europeans brought this side of their culture of executions to the USA too. I talked about that in this video. In Europe, permission was even given to drink blood. Even jam or marmalade were prepared using that. Money was charged from patients for a dead hand stroke. For skin complaints, a fee of 2 shillings and 6 pence. It was a part of the European economy. And here, I am not talking about the so-called hand of glory. To know what that means, please read this. Something that was pickled and even hung on a church door. But see this. On the one hand, Europeans desperately used hangman services for their silly cures, and on the other hand, the executioner's trade was considered dishonorable.
You are not allowed to touch anything. Use a stick, you!
These people in Europe were marginalized because of their so-called polluted status. They were treated as the lowest caste in the European Christian world. As explained here, in Spain, Sardinia, and in southern Italy, the hand could not touch anything displayed in the markets and used a stick to point at the things he wanted to buy. In Germany, as mentioned here, mummy or wild human was sold in pharmacies as late as the 19th century. And there were a lot of other items in other European pharmacies too. Read about that here. Read what was on sale in London apothecary shops. And here is the dispensatory of the Royal College of Physicians. See the items it listed. And see this. With all the savagery taking place in their country, this delusional English scientist, Dr. Christopher Merritt, even had the audacity to praise the English medicines. He thought that their medicines were the best in the world. Now, take a look at this. England, can you run away from this dirty truth of yours? This is the reality of your Dr. R. James, the reality of the so-called Master Surgeon of France, Jean-Louis Petit, and of Matthias Gottfried Pullman in Germany. the reality of William Klaus, the reality of Sir Theodore Turquet de Mayerne, who was considered to be one of the most eminent practitioners in all of Europe, the reality of Marsilio Ficino, who was one of the most highly respected figures of Renaissance Europe, and the Italian surgeon Leonardo Fioravanti. He was known for urinating on his patients. And then this man, Oswald Kroll, born in Germany, education, University of Marburg. Yes, this university in Germany. He was a physician for some very powerful and prominent personalities. But what kind of medicine did he promote? Well, read this. I have no words to describe this savagery. So, University of Marburg, are you teaching the students about the legacy of Oswald Kroll, or are you also sanitizing history? And the so-called father of neuroscience, Thomas Willis. Take a look at his work. How shameful. And they foolishly celebrate his legacy even today. The influential Italian anatomy professor, Domenico Cotugno. This is his dirty legacy. And Franz Christian Pollini, a German physician, with his centric legacy. The next on the list is Francis. Read this to understand what he carried in his purse. And then this Italian humanist, Girolamo Ruscelli's book and his dirty legacy. Never forget that English pharmacopoeias were recommending asthenia until the 19th century. In England, they even foolishly treated headaches by using moss or by using a hangman's rope. Now tell me, despite the huge presence of European Christian cannibalism, people from the Americas, Africa or India did not invade Europe to civilize those savage Europeans, right? But I'm wondering, when Christian missionaries and Christian terrorists from Europe invaded the land of the so-called pagans, were those Christian invaders also carrying the so-called Christ's bum? Want to know what the Christ bum was made of? Read this. Oh no, Jesus Christ, I am very sorry that they even created a bum made of mummy and used your name. But then, don't be surprised. Saying Christian prayers and drinking human blood at the same time was advised too, in our beautiful Switzerland. Read this. Drink it warm in 3 sips, while repeating the Holy Trinity. And over here, in Italy, the warm hand of a priest. Oh no, hallelujah, hallelujah. And then in England, after Father Edmund Arrowsmith died, his hand was from his body and it became a holy hand. The hand was even used to cure a patient. How? Read this. By stroking the patient with the so-called holy hand of Father Edmund Arrowsmith. Well, don't be surprised here either. Quite recently, somebody's heart was brought to the USA so that Christians can pray around it. It is considered normal even today. If you want to know more about this type of Christian healing, please watch this video. And here you can read a bit more about the strange medicine collection of a highly respected man of God, a proud Christian man who was socially well-connected and very influential. But has the West changed today? How about the 21st century? Well, don't you know what was reported about Harvard? Do you know about the American illegal snatchers? Do you know what happened to the body of Alistair Cook, the renowned BBC broadcaster? Do you know what was reported about Germany, a practice that had been going on for many years in Germany? Do you know what was reported about the remains of dead Ukrainians that were destined for a factory in Germany? Something made in Germany that was seized by Ukrainian authorities. It has been described as a multi-million-dollar trade. As mentioned here, in the US alone, the biggest market and the biggest supplier, an estimated 2 million products derived from human are sold each year. Today, there are many YouTubers, journalists, internet personalities, and others in the West whose remarks about India have upset many Indians. Paul Joseph Watson, Bold and Bankrupt, Patrick Christys, Tucker Carlson, Laura Loomer. The list is quite long. Even this American professor's comments upset many in India, and I responded to her in this video. The truth is that many Indians just pity them. But this series on YouTube is our sincere attempt to re-educate them. Even today, many in the West benefit from India's spiritual and scientific heritage. On the other hand, there are Indian YouTubers who have failed to show the sides of Western and European science that I have surfaced in this video. And in this video, I explained how Europeans benefited from India's wealth and scientific wisdom. It is a must-watch. We in the West need to learn what India has done to improve our standards of living, what India has done to civilize Europeans, or to make them more civilized. This research shows that capitalism, in many ways, was a part of mainstream European culture. Of course, the West must consider introducing this part of Western civilization in schools and universities. We need nationwide debates and discussions about this savage side of Europeans in the Western media and academia. Only when it is done properly can we hope that the future generation in the West will not be as brainwashed, racist, or delusional as the current generation. We need to be brave. In Europe, we need to get rid of the cowardly approach of self-glorifying ourselves by teaching sanitized history. And yes, we need a serious academic inquiry to understand or explore the direct or indirect impact of hundreds of years of cannibalism on these European nations' psyche. Dear Europeans, embrace your history and embrace your identity. Don't run away. Learn who you actually are. Learn how to look in the mirror. Yes, my dear fellow Europeans, you can run, you can hide, but you can't escape the truth. Our channel, based in India, has been producing well-researched content to help you heal and embrace the truth. This video, in particular, can prove to be a turning point and might bring a paradigm shift.
You